Watson, on his podcast with Quincy Avery, he came out and pretty much said, like, Tee Higgins, like, I would love the opportunity to, I'm thinking about our joke with last time we tried to record this.
Yeah.
But Tee Higgins, like, I want you to be a receiver for me. Like, be on this Browns receiving corps because,
Okay, we have to. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
we have
to
pause.
Post it.
Pause. We talked about Tee Higgins already in the last podcast, but we had a long discussion about the draft and all that, and we kind of rushed it. So I wanted to redo this. This is a little behind the scenes for y'all. Sorry not to expose you, Tristan, but we have to throw this in here. Tristan started talking about this, and he said, Deshaun Watson basically told Tee Higgins, "I want you to come play with me," and we lost it. So if you're wondering why we're sitting here giggling to ourselves like a bunch of children, it's because the last time we did this, we could not keep it together. So
no, but then the part that for me makes it so much funnier is after I tried to correct myself, and I said, Deshaun Watson, he's sitting there saying, "T, I want you to come catch balls from me."
dude.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad.
Of course, out of all quarterbacks, it just had to be Deshaun. Like, it just had to be Deshaun. It's too perfect. It's too perfect. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. So but yeah, so he's pretty much pitching for Tee Higgins to become a Brown. And you had already hinted at it. We kind of discussed him in the last episode of the podcast last time we recorded, but we really did rush it. Tee Higgins is a guy that we both like quite a bit. We both feel like makes a lot of sense for this Browns team. There will be a video posted about our thoughts on the receiver position and if we should draft a receiver. We heavily disagreed on that. However, we both agreed that this offseason we had to bring in confirmed, like, elite number 2 receiver. And by all the measurables, Tee Higgins is that. And he brings a lot to this offense. So, Derek, the thought of bringing Tee Higgins to Cleveland and having him become a Cleveland Brown, tell me the reasons why you're for it, besides the fact that Bengals fans would cry a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm sorry, but that's number one. It would just be hilarious. It's so funny watching, like, division rivals swap players. Like, that's the cool thing about the NFL versus college. Like, you don't really see that a whole lot. Maybe now with the portal that'll change. But in the NFL, you occasionally see it, and it's really funny. But, unless it's Joe Hayden going to the Steelers. But he came back home, right? The prodigal son returned, so it's fine. But, nevertheless, it's just funny. It's funny. But as far as, like, the on the field reasons, it makes too much sense, to everything that you just mentioned. And we had a in-depth conversation about the wide receiver room, and where you and me disagree, I think, is kind of the depth side of things. And I think a big key part of this, at least for me, I think probably for both of us, bringing in a guy like Tee Higgins, it really takes a lot of weight off of how important your depth is versus anything else. Like, if Tee Higgins comes in day one, he's your starting X receiver. But the thing about T that is different from who was the other
Mike
one
Evans?
we were talking? No, not Mike Evans. Who's the one?
Pittman.
No, the Chargers. We were talking about trading
Mike Williams.
For him. Mike Williams.
Yeah.
So the big difference for me and why I'm against that is I love versatility. Like, that's something I love the most. And Tee Higgins, he's an X receiver. Like, he's a big dude, whatever. But he can play inside and outside for you. And he's underrated as far as speed goes. He's great contested catch guy. The radius of his catches is great. He's just all around a great receiver. And, in a Bengals room with a number one in Jamar Chase, who's incredible, T is the number two, and then Tyler Boyd is the number three. That was one of the best, if not the best, receiving duos in the NFL with a healthy Joe Burrow. And for the Browns, Tristan, it's so important, right? We talked about Ken Dorsey and what the pass game is going to look like and how it's going to change. Deshaun mentioned it in his video. He said, we want to pass more, and we talked about that. That's not a little throw-in line. That's if Deshaun's saying it, that's a big part of this offseason. So Tee Higgins would give you so much more, as far as Amari Cooper being your solidified number one, Tee Higgins being your solidified number two. That gives you so much flexibility and versatility with your number three, whether if it be Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, David Bell, or anybody else. We don't even need to have that discussion. But as far as just what it does for you is significant. And I want to pull this up real fast before I run over to you here with your opinions on this. Tee Higgins last year, 2023, Joe Burrow was hurt. He had 42 receptions, 656 yards, 5 touchdowns. Not great, right? It wasn't his best year at all. But 2022 and 2021 were outstanding years, which is funny. This past year was his worst year in the NFL. And he played in 12 games. So last year in 2022, he had 109 targets, over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. 2021, 74 receptions, just over 1,000 yards again, 6 touchdowns. And then his rookie season, he had 908 yards, 6 touchdowns. So he's averaging like 6 touchdowns a year. And, 3 out of 4 years, he has hit near the 1,000-yard receiving mark or 900. So essentially, you're getting a guy who's 6'4", 219 pounds. He's 25 years old. That would come in, and he would just be flexible for you. He could play whatever role you really want him to play, and you're getting a 1,000-yard receiver. So, Tristan, we had high hopes for Elijah Moore. I think he has shown us some flashes. But I think me and you both agree, and I think everybody who's probably watching this as Browns fans, I would assume agree that maybe our expectations with Elijah Moore need to come down a little bit, and we can't rely on him to be the number two. So Tee Higgins makes too much sense. And he's 25. He's 25.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which fits into another reason why this makes it a perfect, ideal signing. Because AB, you've seen it in his draft classes, albeit besides this last year. But you've seen it in a lot of his drafts leading up to this year and a lot of his free agency signings. He tends to go for the younger guys that are available because they have less tread on the tires. You can rely on them a little bit more. I also did want to mention before I continue, it's funny enough that we were talking about it. It is confirmed Cliff Kingsbury was hired as the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that is set in stone.
Hey, can I throw something in real fast before you go? Because this is important too.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Last time we talked about it, you mentioned about the cap. We need to
Yes.
re-talk about that again. Because Tristan, for those of you who doesn't know, Tristan is really good with the cap and kind of... Yes, you are. Shut up. Tristan's good with the cap and understanding it more than I am. I was on the website playing around with it, and I'm like, okay, how do I get here?
So I listen and watch a lot of Jack Duffin stuff, read a lot of his stuff. Highly recommend following him. And I also have the lovely access to the website overthecap.com, which everybody has access to. So I will quickly run through this, just to kind of, for those that are kind of asking, like, can we afford Tee Higgins? The answer is yes. It's a big yes, and I'll explain exactly why. So our current cap for next season, we are negative 19.5 million in the hole, a little bit extra. So a little bit over that, but it's like $2,000 that we're over. So So, how are we going to be able to afford T. Higgins? Well, for starters, restructuring deals. So, whenever you restructure a deal, think about it like this. Essentially, you're paying a player up front before the year begins as a big bonus. He has a lower, um, base cap hit for the year. And then you also, with that, kind of push some of his cap to the following year. Is at least how I kind of understand it. Um, so you get by doing that, it creates a lower cap hit for this year. So, um, that's at least my extension of it. Again, if you want a more in-depth explanation of it, Jack Duffin will be able to guide you with that because he knows the ins and outs of it like you wouldn't believe. So, if we restructured the following players, Deshaun Watson, so with Deshaun's contract alone, that's just shy of $33.6 million that we would free up. Denzel Ward, it would be just shy of 10.7. Jedrick Wills, it's just shy of 9.8. Batonio, a little over 4.25. Teller, it's 3.4. Myles Garrett, 3.1. And David Njoku, 1.9, essentially. So that's all the money that we free up by just restructuring those guys. Now, contract extensions. When we extend a player's contract, what we can do is essentially what we did with the restructuring, where we make it so we pay them a higher bonus at the very beginning and kind of push the cap hit a little bit later, and have a lower cap hit to start. So if we extended Amari Cooper and we formatted it to that liking, which we have done for multiple of our other contracts this past year, I want to say Juan Thornhill's dollar value, I think his cap hit was like 2.5 million, and we signed him for 7 mil annually. So that gives you a good understanding of where we're at with cap with doing this contract structure this way. So if we did that with Amari Cooper, $15 million we save in cap space. Nick Chubb, 8.5, and Dustin Hopkins, 1.3. Now, what we can also do, so bonuses hit June 1st. After June 1st, like signing bonuses, I mean. After June 1st, it's just base salary. So, if we were to wait after June 1st, we would be able to trade Jack Conklin, and we would free up a little over $4.5 million of cap space. Now, Derek, I had you guess how much it was last time that we recorded this. I want to say you guessed about 60.
I don't remember.
I think you guessed
genuinely
60.
don't remember. Yeah.
So now keep in mind the numbers I read to you were rounded. The calculation I did was with exacts. Our cap space, if we did all of that, which I'm anticipating Andrew Berry would do, would then go to $76.6 million. So, can we afford Tee Higgins? Absolutely. Now, does that mean that we spend every dime of that $76.6 million? Absolutely not. Because remember, it's kind of like a balancing act here. You know, we have to be able to afford to extend players like JOK, who we will actually get into later today. You know, and we've got to be a little bit cautious with it. Now, the other thing, which I actually did not factor into these calculations, was, let's say the Browns did want to spend over $76.6 million, which I think would be insane. They technically could. And the reason for that is, and again, this is my knowledge of it, Jack Duffin will probably be able to tell you more. Whenever there is a team that does not spend up to the cap the previous year, whatever cap space they did not use, they can use that amount of cap space in overage the following year with no penalty. So let's say last year the Browns finished with $20 million in cap space, which I want to say we were around 15. I can't remember. But we could hypothetically add 15 million onto the 76 million, and that would take us to 91 million. So that is where we are at with cap space. So
that's why it pays to have Andrew Berry. That's why it pays to have guys like this.
And it pays to have owners that are willing to spend the extra cash to,
Yes.
be able to pay these players and bonuses early in the year as well. So that's where the Haslams come into this, and they are luckily very happy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes manipulating the cap a lot easier for us. So with all of that being said, we can absolutely afford Tee Higgins. We absolutely can. However, again, we can't be reckless with our spending. And that's why I think we can afford to pay T, in my eyes, up to $25 million a year, maybe a little over. But if you're getting near the $30 million a year mark, I think that's a bit rich for Tee Higgins. And that's when I would look to potentially do a trade for Mike Williams, because we both agree Tee Higgins is a better fit here. Makes more sense. However, there's a certain need that this team has, and it's to have that guy on the boundary, that that X receiver. And Mike Williams can do that. And if we made a deal for him, he would essentially be here, a 1 year, like $20 million deal, and we'd only have to ship off maybe like a 6th round pick, 5th round pick. Like, it's yeah. So that, if you're saving $10 million, it makes a lot more sense to do that. But we'll see. Tee Higgins particularly, though, because I talked a lot about the cap, talked a lot about the money side of it. I'm with you, man. That's my number 1 target, because he was the best number 2 on the best receiving core in the league. And I know people argue it, but he was the best number 2 receiver when Burrow was healthy, of course, too. He was the best number 2 receiver in the league, in my eyes. So to have the opportunity to get him at 25 years of age, I think it's a very unique opportunity, and I think he fits us really well. And, if I'm Tee Higgins, of course he wants to get paid, but wouldn't he want to win too? Like, you want to win. And the other thing that I think could be intriguing that the Browns could pull out too, the Browns, if there's a lot of competition for Tee Higgins, which I expect there's going to be a lot of competition for him, I would not be shocked for the Browns to fully guarantee his deal. Whoa. I would not be shocked. So wow. I would not be shocked. Again, I don't expect that, and I wouldn't necessarily want it. But if it's coming down to, if we fully guarantee his deal, we save $5 million a year annually, I think that they might do it. And if that gets him to sign, they might do it. Because, again, you're talking about a very, very versatile wide receiver who's still very young, that fills a big need for us, that, Deshaun clearly wants to play with. They have a good rapport. I think that this guy could be the signing that completely changes everything for our passing offense, and more particularly Deshaun Watson. We've made a lot of hires to improve this pass game.
Yep. Let's
get some players on the field that can improve it too. And both of us are in agreement. Number 2 receiver position, no matter what this year, we've got to go out and get somebody to help. So yeah, we'll see, man. It's interesting though. It's interesting. What are we gonna do this off season? And that's potentially not even the only big name that we bring in. So because we've got the money to do it. So we just got to be careful with the length of deals that we give him. But with Tee Higgins, with him being as young as he is, you can kind of give him a 4 or 5 year deal and not really sweat about it. You just kind of have to hope that he's able to live up to his APY.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of that too, like for everybody who says, oh, well, I don't really want to give a big contract to a wide receiver. Why don't we go out and just trade up and draft somebody, or somebody who, hits you with that argument? This is what I'll say to that. And Tristan, as much as I do, I'm all about it. 100%, I'd take another swing for the fences at receiver. That's me. We disagree on that. But
this is a very long discussion.
Yes.
Podcast, which eventually will come out. It's just Derek has been working very hard on editing it, because we went all over the place. This is how bad we disagree. And it's very rare. Very rare.
Yeah, but the biggest factor with this, and why I think it needs to be one of Tee Higgins or Michael Pittman, those are my top 2 personally, is the youth side of things. Amari Cooper is 29 years old, which I know surprises a lot of people, because I don't know about you, but I think of Amari Cooper as kind of the old man, even though he's really not that old. Um, T. Higgins at 25 years old, if you were to give him a 4 to 5 year contract, and personally, I would look at a 5 year, and I would feel comfortable doing that, and then just sort of have it more so as like an opt out if you want after year 4 or something along those lines. I'm comfortable with doing that because you look at the structure of the wide receiver room, you could go into the next 2 to 3 years, I would say for sure, with Amari Cooper and Tee Higgins as your top two receivers, and the roles could flip. Tee Higgins could reach a point in his career where he's the number one receiver, right? Which obviously that's what you're hoping for if you sign him and bring him in. Whatever team gets him, that's what they're hoping for. Um, and then you could have Amari Cooper as he gets older. The Browns could make a decision whether if they want to move on from him, or he could not be like as big of a role, which happens a lot. This happens with some of these older receivers. So it gives you so much flexibility. And that is the biggest thing here. Is if you bring in a Tee Higgins, you bring in a Michael Pittman, one of these younger guys. And again, I want to throw this out here. I wouldn't be surprised if Marquise Brown was one of the guys that they, look at to bring in. And, people will argue about that, whatever. I'm not saying it's going to happen. But again, I think they're looking for a guy who is younger, again, 24, 25, who you can have long term and can be a solidified number 1 or 2. I think that is what they're looking for. And Tee Higgins makes, in my opinion, Tee Higgins makes the most sense by far. And another thing, quick, Clemson. That's another factor. Deshaun Watson and Tee Higgins have some sort of relationship with the Clemson ties. They play within the same division together. They know each other. And so much so that I don't think Deshaun Watson would publicly be pursuing Tee Higgins had they not had some sort of a relationship. So I think it makes too much sense. I think it makes sense for Deshaun because you remember D-Hop and him had a great relationship. I think Tee Higgins has some similarities to DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, they're not apples to apples, but I think there's a comparison to be made there. And I think it just makes sense for the Browns. I think it makes sense financially, makes sense roster move-wise, and I think it would be a great, great decision.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention, because I forgot to bring this up when I was talking about contracts, void years. We can add void years onto an end of a contract that also extends kind of the cap hit as well. So, like, notably, Jadeveon Clowney this year, I want to say, counted against our cap for about $4 million, I want to say. And it was a way to, last year, be able to knock his AAV down, his cap hit down, so that way we could kind of squeeze him in and create more cap space for last year. So I think this year counted against $4 million against our cap, I want to say. But yeah, it was, but yeah, moving on. Yeah. Tee Higgins. Yeah. I think we both agree he's our number 1 guy. I think we both agree Michael Pittman would be our number 2. And honestly, like, there's arguments to be made that Michael Pittman's a better receiver than Tee Higgins. It's close. Like, it's a lot closer. However, with Tee Higgins having the experience in the AFC North, that is a thing. And it does matter how to produce in these cold weather games, in these games where, it's chaotic. But also inside-outside versatility, like you said. Michael Pittman, I mean, he could play a bit of slot, but I think Tee Higgins is just better at that. Albeit, I do think Michael Pittman is better on the boundary. I will say that. But it's close. So, trust me, if it was like we ended up signing Michael Pittman, I'd be doing backflips and cartwheels just like I would with Tee Higgins. So those are my two number ones, like 1A, 1B. And then for me personally, I know you don't really like this, but I prefer Mike Williams as my third option. But I hope, cause it is a steep drop off from those 2 to 3, because Mike Williams, I think he is a good receiver still. I think he has a lot of value being a jump ball receiver. but he is kind of a one-trick pony. He's a big physical guy, can go down the field. He's not really a guy that's going to create a ton of separation, so there's limits to his game. But again, we'll see. We'll see what happens, but it's certainly going to be an interesting offseason, and we both think that the Browns are going to target this number 2 receiver spot as a priority, as they should. Now, you had mentioned with Elijah Moore that we should taper back our expectations based off of what he originally was, and I agree with that. We do need to kind of be a little bit more realistic about him, but make no mistake about it, Elijah Moore as the third receiver, I think could add a lot of value. I think as a guy that, if Amari goes down or if somebody else goes down, he could slot in at number 2 spot and make some plays. I think he's a solid player. Just like I think that, while we haven't seen enough from David Bell, I feel that David Bell could be a very solid player. I think, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name. Cedric Tillman could be a very solid player. We haven't seen enough from those two guys, but we'll see. It's interesting though, because if you add that number 2 guy, I think the competition for that 3 spot is very interesting, and I ultimately I'm excited to see what we do at the second receiver spot. I will say, if we draft somebody as number 2 receiver, I'm gonna be pissed. Yes,
Hey,
because we
me
can't
too.
rely on that. We can't.
Yeah, me too. And that's the biggest thing for me is I think regardless of what anybody thinks of the structure of this room, listen, this team has had a weird, kind of a weird take at the wide receiver position is what I would say. And I think, listen, I love Cedric Tillman. I am way higher on what I think Tillman can be versus probably most people, but I'm not relying on that next year. I'm not going to rely on Elijah Moore to be the number 2 next year. I'm not going to rely on David Bell to be the number 2 next year. If I'm the Browns, if I'm Andrew Berry, this is a critical year. This is a make or break season. Go get the best. And you can do so. We talked about it. I know everybody's like, well, you got to pay Deshaun and you got to, listen. Yes, you're right. And that is a reality. However, you can also work around it. And if you have the right people in place, you can do what we talked about. And that's what the Browns will do. So whether it's Michael Pittman, Tee Higgins, Marquise Brown, trade for somebody, I think they're going to get a guy similar to what we did with Watson, where it was like, we want to know what our quarterback is, which you could argue we don't know what our quarterback is. That's fair. Whatever. We're not going to talk about that. But I think they're going to look at receivers and say, we want to get a guy who we know what he is, who's younger, that we can build around as the future, past Amari Cooper. So whether if that's Terry McLaurin in a trade or somebody like that, then I think we would do it. I think that's how significant they look at that wide receiver position.
Cliff Kingsbury, if I'm not mistaken, he traded a first-round pick for Marquise Brown. So, listen, they don't need Terry McLaurin. They just got to bring that boy home, sign him in free agency. Don't even have to trade a first-round pick for him this time.
Yeah.
So, we'll see.
Too bad we don't have Anthony Schwartz. We could convince them to take Anthony Schwartz with Kingsbury.
Oh, my gosh. Listen, Cliff. Yeah. I've never seen a guy run an end around right into somebody else better than Anthony Schwartz. No, I'm playing. But for receiver talk, was there anything else you wanted to bring up before we kind of moved on? Or do you think you're ready to kind of move on? Because I don't have much else on receivers.
I'm ready to move on if you want.
Great.